Last week we discussed how retail was being taken over by online culture. You don't need to drive to a mall anymore. You can just look it up on Amazon.com. And so because of that, you all these stores and places that we're talking about are just disappearing and or dying, and people don't really know how to respond to this. So I at the end of the videos, I talked about how there was this cultural cycle called the dominant and the dominated. It's called domination theory or domination cycles. And you will probably hear about it if you take up sociology a little bit, but it doesn't get brought up a lot in anthropology or history. Even though historians know about it, they don't have any terms. Historians don't like terms for the most part. We'll be like, oh, the Renaissance, but then we'll be like, but was that the Renaissance? I don't know. I mean, there was influence from the Renaissance, but really it wasn't that at this era and this area. I don't know. We get very pedantic on it, honestly. But anyway, on to the domination theory. So the first thing you got to know about is the dominant and the dominated. The dominant are superpowered. We view them with kind of awe, and it's just an obvious thing that they are the dominant one. The dominant are the people who make the decisions, who everybody refers to as in charge, important, and the logical sound people to do things. The dominated are a different group altogether. They're not considered good enough. They don't have, the cool factor. They are kind of a dumping ground for anything that's bad. Everybody just goes, oh, well, it's their fault. It's got to be their fault. And yes, I chose the cars out carefully. The last one, the previous one for the dominant is a 76 Camaro, and this is a 76 Toyota Celica. The Toyota eventually ended up beating the Camaro in gas mileage and in buyership, which destroyed much of what we call the Detroit steel area. The Detroit hasn't really dropped in steel sales, but that's another story. This is a nice way of showing that the dominated, at this time, Japan totally accepted that they were dominated by Detroit, but they were willing to do things that Detroit was not. And this is an entirely thing where it's perceived in our minds. This is very much so the prison experience or the prison experiment. This is a very, very famous experiment. And it was where they got a group of guys and they were told, okay, you guys, just randomly, you are now prison guards and the others are prisoners. And, we're just going to, spend a week pretending to be prison guards and prisoners. And we're going to give you all some money for it. And the thing is, after a while, it started to get bad. They started to torture each other. They started to do things that were against the rules. The prisoners started to, look down and feel demoted. They started to feel like they weren't worth anything. The prison guards felt that they, had to take down the power. They had to show their power, and they had to teach the prisoners who was what. One guy actually had to leave because he was starting to get health risk, and he's just like, I'm out. And the prison guards actually started to think about kidnapping this guy because he obviously had tricked his way out. And it's a very famous experiment because it shows that we try really hard to talk about subjects, but sometimes we forget how it can get into our heads. And in this case, you can see the dominant and the dominated are purely in their minds. These were just random guys chosen for jobs. And, had it been the other way, it probably would have been the same thing. So we have to understand that this domination theory is purely in our minds. You can probably do all sorts of things, but in your mind, you're like, no, I'm dominated. Therefore, I cannot do this because it is against the wishes of the dominant. And during the same time, we have something called Stalin's divide. And Stalin's divide is where the dominant take the dominated and have them fight against each other. This is a bit of Eastern Europe. It's a country that used to be called Yugoslavia. And now it is Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Vojvodina, Serbia, Montenegro, Kosovo, and Macedonia. And I think Albania and Greece is in there as well. But the people here used to be part of one country, and they used to be united. Stalin came in and said, "Okay, I want you guys to fight for, privileges." And these privileges were things like the ability to eat, the ability to buy a car, to not be yelled at on TV. These are very obvious things that you're not even thinking about. And so he would praise certain groups and, bring down others. And this made everybody just kind of angry at each other and start fighting each other. And because of this, the USSR did not have to fight them as much. They were the dominant ones and they were the referees. Whereas the people of Yugoslavia were fighting against each other, against the dominant and dominated in their area. And this allowed the USSR to rule over them. And as soon as the USSR fell, as soon as their domination was gone, these problems continued and they started to break apart. So that is a very, very basic history of some Eastern European countries. But I'm sure you can imagine the same thing happening in whatever culture you're in. Many companies like you to think about, the fighting between the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3, when in fact many companies consider them the same consoles. They're like, it takes the same graphics, it takes the same things. We just have to do some small tweaks, and it's playable for the other system. So they don't care. They just release it for both consoles and PC because everything is standard within there. So they just go, okay, here, fight over this. Oh, which one of these games has the better graphics? Better fight it over. But the reality is, it doesn't matter. In the mind of the company, it doesn't matter. And so because we're fighting over it, we're more likely to buy this product to prove that our graphics are better. You get the idea? And then we have persecution. And the persecution of the dominated is incredible. These are all pictures from what was called struggle sessions in Soviet China. And these were berserk, horrific things. These people were tortured. The hat on the guy's head says, he must be punished or killed. Sorry, I'm not very good at this. But a lot of them are showing, dishonored and, they should be taken down. They owned houses. How dare they? Things like that. And also, I believe the bottom part is actually their name. But what is the number 1 going? I don't understand. But they were considered the bourgeoisie, and they were put into these positions, and they were told to do this for hours on end while people just screamed at them constantly. They would be hit and punched. They would be thrown into fires. And not only would they be persecuted, their kids would be persecuted, and then their grandkids would be persecuted in school. They would be taken into school and just have that hat be put on them, and they would have to be treated like they were scum because at one time in their lives they owned land or they had a little bit more power than others. This persecution was horrific. But it was deemed necessary because the dominant now viewed these people as needing to be taught a lesson. They are dominated. They need to be shown who is in charge. And it got over the top horrific. And I wish I could read Chinese a little better. But, I think I don't know what that one is. It's not a 1. But anyway, you can see, the poster on the right is actually made by the Chinese, showing how they're pulling down the man. They're telling the man what to do, and they themselves are in charge. But the people feel that the government is taking control over the horrible people that were once dominant, and this persecution continues for 3 generations. And you have to think about that a little bit. Domination theory isn't just, he looked at me weird. It's, he did something so wrong. I should punish him for the rest of his life and his children's lives and his children's children's lives because he did something wrong. And it brings up a lot of questions like, what if you were to blame me for a war that I had nothing to do with, that my dad had nothing to do with, and which my grandfather had nothing to do with? You would immediately be like, well, that would be stupid. And yet I'm German, and I get asked all the time about World War II. And I'm like, first off, we fought on the American side. We fought for the U.S. How dare you? But, you know, it's just a question that people don't realize that is there. They don't think that this persecution can happen to the now dominant. They think, well, we can get revenge, which is going to come up in the next video on why this is all happening. And then we have a golden age, and this is what everybody is striving for. Those who are persecuted and the dominated remember a time when they were in charge and they had power, and oh, cool, there's a link, so you should go to it. And they remember that time and they're like, oh, someday we're going to have this again. And then those who are dominant will be like, okay, we're going to try for this. This is our wanted status here. And they will push for it. And I chose King Arthur because if you go to England and you reference King Arthur, many of the people there will be like, oh, someday when we're at our greatest need, King Arthur will come and save us. And they've got, the thing on the right is actually a, what are they called? A tapestry. This is not knit, but sewn together. I don't know how to say that correctly. Where they created this entire tapestry of knowledge about King Arthur, and they were trying to show that he's this great and glorious king. And, you know, King Arthur is just this legend, this semi-legend. There was actually some guys like it, but they weren't named Arthur for the most part. There may have been a Roman general named Arturius, and there was a a Welsh king who had a lot of interesting things. For example, Marilyn is actually Welsh. So, you know, it comes out that way. But the people, they changed the story so that it's something to be vaunted for, something, a time when they were dominant. And so whenever they feel dominant, they reference this and they say, we will have this again. We are making this. And those who are dominated go, remember this time, remember this era, remember how great we were, this will happen. We will have it again. And so these two groups both have their golden age that they want to achieve, and they vie for it for every reason that they've got. And this kind of sets up the next part, the slow power change, as we'll call it. And I'm going to talk about this tomorrow on the next video. So, forgot to date that. Okay, well, catch you all later.